start by walking you through a Google Doc I made, sort of similar to last time. So you have instructions. I'm going to share that in the chat right now, right there. There we go. And these are instructions from the before times. These are, pre-COVID. They talk about working with a buddy when you do this, to have someone to pin the pants for you. So I'm going to just walk you through those briefly, and then I'm going to talk about how I hem pants when I don't have a buddy, when I'm socially distanced. So I'm going to share my screen. Great. Okay, there we go. So for these instructions, they start with you trying on the pair of pants. The easiest way to figure out what the right length is when they are on your body. It's a good idea to test when you're standing up and sitting down, because the length of a pair of pants will shift depending on sort of what you're doing, and you want them to fit both ways. Beforehand, Mina and I were talking about how I have always heard that the average sort of straight-sized pair of pants are built to fit someone who's about 5'4" to 5'6", which is a pretty limited range, and that petite clothes often are built to fit someone who's closer to like 5'2", and then tall clothes are built to fit people who are more in that 5'8", 5'10" range. But there are so many of us who fall outside of that. Particularly on the shorter end, I think the average American woman is a little bit shorter than, the average pair of pants. So it's always a good idea to know how to hem them. So right here, under 2A, I've mentioned the break in pants. This comes up a lot when you're talking about suit pants, men's suit pants, the idea of a break. It's the little dent that you see in the front of the leg. So when you've got a pair of pants, the bottoms of them, depending on how long your leg is, depending on what shoes you're wearing, depending on how sort of wide the leg is, will often get a little bit dented. And so that dent in the front is called the break. And there's no one rule about what the break should be. It honestly changes depending on fashion trends. Right now, especially for men, like a more cropped pair of pants, something that has little to no break is, pretty trendy. But at other times, if you think of like an 80s power suit, something that's a little bit more relaxed, you might see a really deep break in those. You might sort of see a crease where, you get a full sort of fold over. In general, a small break, 1 to 2 inches, is just really flattering for legs. So when you are hemming, when you are standing up, you don't want to go too high. You don't want to really go above your ankle bone. And in fact, you kind of want to pin them so that you've got about 1 inch or 2 break on the top of your foot. This will also mean that when you sit down, you're not going to wind up with a pair of capri pants. They'll be long enough that they'll still look like full-length pants when you're sitting. So in general, you can stand on a chair. You can have somebody sort of pin that up for you. If we were doing this in person, I would make you all pair off and, put on your pants inside out and pin them up at that level. But of course, we are not. We are socially distanced. And then test your pants, both standing and sitting. I will say when I was in middle school, I was pretty short, and I would make my mom hem all my pants for me before the beginning of the school year. And I would be, very firm that I didn't want the break. I wanted them all to just hit at my ankle, and all of them wound up way too short. I should have listened to her. I should have allowed, them to fall a little bit longer so that I wouldn't be cold in the winter when I sat down. So then once you've done that, once they're pinned, you want to turn them inside out so that you can get a good look at the hem. Here, I have got both jeans and wool dress pants behind me. And so I thought we could talk a little bit about how they have different hems. So depending on what type of pants you've got, that's going to dictate whether or not you hem them with a machine or by hand. So these right here in front of me, these are just a standard pair of jeans. They are hemmed by machine, and then they're hemmed with this very distinctive sort of golden yellow polyester thread. You can buy this at Joann's. If you want your hem to disappear, you can buy nice dark blue thread. But if you want that kind of, iconic Levi's golden stitching, you can get a spool of that yarn for, relatively cheap. It's a little bit thicker. So I'm gonna hold that up to the camera right there. Compared to normal sewing thread, which is much smaller, jean thread, the stuff right here is thicker. So it's a little bit more durable. It's not the worst idea if you have to hem, 10 pairs of pants, or if you plan on hemming, every pair of jeans you're ever gonna buy. Pick up a spool of jeans yarn right there. So if you are working with wool dress pants though, these are something you're probably gonna wanna hem by hand. If you look at the hem of a nice pair of pants, you won't see a line of stitching. You won't see those running stitches. What you'll see is almost invisible, and then maybe if you catch it in the right light, your hemming should just look like a series of little dents. You want the hemming on suit pants to be almost invisible. So that's what most of this document is about, because it's a little bit more involved than just finding your length and sending it through a sewing machine. So for this, we would start by turning pants inside out. And if we had the length that we knew, if we knew what length we were working for, we would then cut the threads that are there. These are suit pants, so they were done with a special hemming machine somewhere in a factory. They're done with a invisible thread, essentially. It's a clear sort of polyester fiber, and I would cut them with a pair of scissors or use a seam ripper. I personally like working with scissors because I think you have a little bit more control. A seam ripper, you're sort of pulling, but with a small pair of scissors, you can really isolate a thread and snip it, hopefully without distorting the surrounding area. So,
Anna Rose, can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Yes.
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 I'm wondering if you could not share your screen and just talk us through what's on the page.
Sure.
So we can't see you as well.
Oh, sorry, I forget about that when I'm doing Zoom. So in that case, I'm gonna just show you the hem of these pants again. These right there, can you kind of see that the hem looks like a series of little dents?
Yes, I can.
Yes, okay. So that's what you want your suit pants hem to look like. You don't want to see that row of running stitches. You don't want to see the row of machine stitching. You just want to see just these little dents in the fabric. And then when you're standing up, if you're moving around, it's going to look pretty much invisible. And that's in comparison to your jeans hem, where you see machine stitching that, there's no one's trying to make that invisible. On both the front and the back, you can see the stitching, and that's done with just commercially available thread intended to be used with jeans, which is a little bit stretchier than regular thread. So, better now, a little bit clearer. Great. So for these suit pants, just as I was saying, I am working with small scissors instead of a seam ripper. Really, if you feel super comfortable with the seam ripper, if you love using it, do whatever you want. But because I don't want to displace any of the yarns and the wool fabric, because I don't want to snag anything, if I was working with silk instead of wool, I just feel a little bit more comfortable removing stitches by opening up a seam, finding what I want to cut, and then cutting it rather than pulling with a seam ripper. Yeah. So once I had that open, I would want to iron it out. I would want to get this really flat. That I would say is one step that people often skip, ironing when they're sewing, particularly if you're just trying to get the piece flat before you work with it. You kind of want to jump to that step where you're doing things, where you're making changes. But in this case, ironing is going to be really helpful. So I've done that already with these jeans over here. You can see I've just ironed it out so that I have a long straight leg. So I can think of this as kind of like my blank canvas. It's ready for me to work with. Sorry, I'm wishing now that I had undone this leg before I started talking to you. So. But I'm going to switch actually to talking about socially distanced pants hemming. So instead of working on these, I've got two pairs of jeans right here. One of these are my favorite pants. I love the length that they're at. You know, I wish all of my pants were at this length. And these other ones, these are way too long. These are the ones that are kind of stretched out, that are ready to be sort of shortened. And so if you don't have a buddy, and if these instructions that I sent around don't really work for you, because you don't have anyone to pin up your pants, there is still a very easy trick you can use in order to shorten your jeans. So for this, I am going to flatten out my long jeans. I'm going to put them on the bottom of my work table, and I am going to lay these other pants on top. So this works if you have two pairs of pants that fit at the same level. These are both high-waisted jeans. It wouldn't work if I had a high-waisted pair and a low-waisted pair. What I'm doing is comparing the length of the legs and working from there. So make sure that the two pairs of pants you have fit relatively similarly and are not super different. You can also, you know, if you're shopping and you know you're looking for a new pair of pants, you can measure your favorite pants at home. You can measure kind of along the outside. So that's 36.5. And when you're shopping, you can look for pants that are about that length, or you can just measure pants that you find out in the world and know that something will have to be hemmed, or know that something might be too short or too long. It's not a bad idea to know the measurements of your favorite garment so that you can buy more clothes that fit like that, especially right now when dressing rooms are closed. So that's what I'm going to do. So for this right here, we are in my craft nook. So I've got all my tools today, which is nice. I have got the two pants on top of each other. You can see the ones down below. These are significantly longer than the ones that are on top of them. I can check that they're lined up all along that side seam. And I can check that on the inseam, they're also lined up, so that they're going to fit both on the outside and the inside of the leg. When you're hemming pants, it's not a bad idea to make sure that they work on both the inside and the outside seam. If you took them to a tailor, that would be measurements that they would check, both inseam and outseam. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of extra material for the hem. I don't want to chop these off at the same length as my good pants. I want to have something that I can fold up and that I can fold under so that I've got a finished edge. Particularly for jeans, I'm probably going to wash these in hot water. I'm probably going to want to send them through the dryer. So I don't want them to fray out. I want them to have a pretty nice substantial hem. These pants have a hem that is 1 full inch, and I'm going to add an extra ½ inch so I have something to tuck under. It might be a little bit bulkier than some people would prefer, but it's going to give me a pretty solid, substantial hem. If you don't want bulk, you could do a little bit less. Maybe you could do a ½ inch under and a ½ inch under again. But I'm going to add 1.5 inches on my tape measure. Angle this down right here. I'm not doing the hand cam this time, but I'm hoping that this will work right here because I'm pretty close to the screen. So I am going to measure 1.5 inches down on the inside, and I'm going to mark it. This is a water-soluble pencil, so when I send this through the wash, the marks will come off. You could use chalk if you wanted. You could use probably a Crayola marker if you have a child's washable marker laying around. Both of those work really well for sewing. And then I'm going to mark it over here again. Then I am going to use my tape measure. I don't have a ruler on hand, but if I did, oh, actually I do. There we go. This is just a clear ruler. I'm going to use that.
Is one pair of pants inside out on purpose and one pair outside out?
You could do this essentially with either pair of pants in either direction. If I were working with suit pants, I would want both of them to be inside out. Jeans are a little bit more forgiving. I turned the top one inside out so you could see this awesome hem. And then I'm going to turn these other ones inside out when I work with them, but I think it's fine to do your first cut with them in either direction.
Okay.
So now I've got a series of little dashes that I made with my marker, and I'm going to cut this. I'm going to cut through both the top and the bottom because they are jeans. But if I were working with wider legged pants, something where I noticed that there was a real difference between the top and the bottom. Some pants, when you turn them inside out, you'll see that the top, the front of the leg is going to be higher than the back of the leg. If that was the case, then I would mark the front and then mark the back and then cut. But for these, they're about the same. They fit kind of cropped higher up on the leg. We're not as worried about the break. So the front and the back are pretty similar here. So I have now made my cut. And what I want to do, I've already done this on one leg, so you don't have to watch me iron for 10 minutes. But I want to make sure that I go to the iron, and first I'm going to fold over 1/2 inch and I'm going to iron that down. These are spandex pants. They've got a little bit of stretch in them, so they're not going to hold the crease very well. I can go over them with an iron set on hot and they're still going to be a little bit loose. They're still, they're not going to lay perfectly flat. So first I am going to iron them 1/2 inch, then I'm going to fold that over 1 inch and iron a second time, and then I'm going to pin that into place. I want to get the pins in pretty quickly because, as I said, it's spandex, so it wants to be flat. It'll uncurl even if you put a lot of heat on it. So,
Anna Rose, do you mark it again for at that quarter, that 1/2 inch, and then 1 inch more than that, so that you know where
if it's the first time you're working with this, I would suggest you totally do that. That's a great idea, Mina. So for these, that would be a moment where it would be great to have them inside out, right there. So if I've got that raw edge, if I've got that cut, I would totally take my tape measure. I would measure 1/2 inch, and then I could make some markings. If you happen to have one of these clear rulers, these are great because they have sort of the 1/2 inch and inch markings on them. So I could lay this down on top of my fabric, line it up because it's clear. I can see that it's all lined up. And then I could just make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 markings in a row without having to constantly move my tape measure. But you don't necessarily need one. If you've got a tape measure, that'll do too. It's just a little bit slower. So here. So then I've got my 1/2 inch marked. I could go over to my iron, fold that up, iron that in place. I could come back to my work table. I could then make my inch markings and then go back over to my iron and get that folded. So that's what I've done on this leg. And the more you do this, the more you'll become comfortable sort of just eyeing 1/2 inch and 1 inch. Or even, maybe you'll get to know which one of your knuckles is exactly 1/2 inch, and you can kind of use that as a comparison. But this side, this is ready to go. So because these are jeans, I could send them through the machine, but I'm going to do this the old-fashioned way. I'm going to hem these by hand. So I've got a little bit of dark blue thread. I've decided that I want my hem to disappear, so I'm going to use thread that's almost the same color as the outside of the jeans. Sometimes thread might appear a little bit lighter or darker, so it's always a good idea to take your thread, unspool a little bit of it, and just lay it down on the jeans to check if it's a good color match. It looks a little bit lighter when it's in the spool, but when I stretch a single sort of thread out, it just disappears. So I know that this is a pretty decent match.
Anna Rose, are those, is that regular thread or is it like a thicker thread because you're working with jeans?
It's a little bit thicker. It's polyester also, so it's strong. I could work with cotton for these, but that would be maybe a little less durable. Yeah, it's not a bad idea to use slightly thicker thread, but I wouldn't use buttonhole thread for this. I still want to be able to easily, stitch through it.
And does it make a difference that the jeans are a little bit stretchy? Is there any particular thread you need because it's stretchy?
So because it's stretchy, I'm going to do a stitch that's got a little bit more flexibility. I don't really like working with elastic thread because I think washing it in hot water makes it fall apart. I don't think elastic thread has a very long shelf life. And I think if you're going to bother hemming your own pants, you don't want to, come back in a year's time and find that your thread has sort of crumbled in hot water. And jeans are something that I wear, when I do sort of dusty, dirty tasks, and I want to just be able to throw them in the washing machine on hot without worrying about the sewing thread I've used. Okay. So I'm using polyester because it's a little stronger, but I'm not taking that extra step into stretchy spandex thread, which you can totally get, but which, it's not around for like 5 years. It's really not very long lasting. So in the document I sent to you, the 10 steps to hem dress pants, if you scroll down to step 10, the final step, you're going to see 2 different types of stitching, catch stitching and herringbone stitching. And they look a little bit sort of similar, but they produce a different effect. And herringbone stitching is great when you're hemming pants. It works really well on wool dress pants. It makes that basically invisible hem where it looks like a series of little dents. And it's a little bit more flexible than catch stitching. So I think it's a good solution for a narrow pair of pants where I know I'm gonna have to sneak this over my ankle. Sometimes, I might try to shove my foot through when I've got a sneaker on, even though I know it's a bad idea and it's a stretchy fabric. So I want a more flexible stitch on my stretchy jeans. So it's gonna be herringbone stitching. And so that is the second diagram. The first one, the light blue one, that's a catch stitch. The second one is a herringbone stitch. So for that, it almost feels like you're walking backwards. That's the best analogy I can think of for a herringbone stitch. I am going to start by sneaking in between into this sort of center roll I've got right here. I'm going to start in there. These pants have a little notched edge, and I'm going to leave that because I kind of like it. But you could close that up, or you could open it up, make one. You could sort of decide to do whatever you want with your pants. So I'm going to start with 3 stitches into the side seam. That will give me a nice, secure place to work with. I can now kind of pull on my thread, and I don't feel any give. So this hopefully will mean that, as I go out into the world, as I run around in these pants, the beginning of my seam is very secure. So what I'm doing is I'm stitching towards the beginning of my seam. Normally when I stitch, I start sort of at point A and I go forward, over, under. Here, I'm looking at the beginning and I'm stitching towards it, but in the other direction. So this is a little bit weird, but I'm making stitches towards the beginning as I go away from the beginning. So that's my first stitch. This is my second stitch. These are essentially back stitches. And I'm making 1 back stitch in the cuff, and I'm making 1 back stitch in the ground material, 1 back stitch in the cuff.
Are they overlapping, Anna Rose?
What do you mean? Sorry. They're spaced about 1/2 inch apart.
Oh, I see. Okay.
1 back stitch in the ground material. And so the little dents that you saw on the front of those suit pants, those were just the back stitches into the ground material. The stitches that I'm making into the cuff do not go all the way through. I am just catching the top layer of this triple fold right here. If I feel, I've got my hand underneath, so if I feel the needle when I'm stitching into the cuff, that means I've gone too far. I should feel the needle when I'm stitching into the leg because that's my little dent. And when I'm stitching into the cuff, I'm really not going all the way through. I'm just grabbing the top of that roll.
So you're not really stitching the hem into the material. You're sort of connecting them.
Yeah, I'm sort of connecting them. And because I've got this type of stitch that uses a lot of thread, you're going to find yourself rethreading your needle sort of more frequently than you might otherwise. It's really flexible. It can go back, it can go forward, but I'm using a heavier weight thread, so it's a little bit more durable. And on the exterior, it's absolutely invisible. You just get, you know, your pants just look like they end. So those.
Anna, did you start your thread with a knot at the end, or did you do triple stitches?
I started with a knot and then I did triple stitches. I did both because these are jeans and I'm not messing around. So you could sort of just start with a knot, but I think because I'm, you know, planning on having, you know, this be a little bit flexible, it's a good idea to have a secure beginning and end. So if I do have to change my thread, the way I said, this kind of eats up a lot of your thread really quickly. What I would do is I would make triple stitches into the cuffs again, not going all the way through, but I would go 1, 2, 3, and then I would just make a little knot right here, and then I would cut it off. And then start with a new thread that has a knot at the end. And I would get in between the cuff and the pants. I would stitch right up into the cuff and start from there. So you might have to do this, you know, if you are stitching. Don't, you know, be worried about having to start a new thread. It's always easier than trying to finish with like this tiny piece of thread that, you know, keeps coming unthreaded. I'm a big fan of, you know, cut it off and start a fresh piece. So.
And do knots take a long time to disappear? Are they, how durable is a knot?
I think it depends on how sort of densely woven your pant material is. If you have a really loosely woven material, if you have something that's kind of gauzy, a knot can pretty easily pass through that. You know, you wind up making a giant bulky knot that then is visually obtrusive, or you wind up, you know, just easily pulling through with a knot. So in that case, if I was working with a really lightweight material, I would want to make 3 tiny back stitches instead of a knot. But with a heavier sort of densely woven thing, a knot can hold in place really well.
Great.
Okay. Does anyone have any other questions?
In a dress pants, do you have those dents also? Because I always tried to hide, like do a hidden stitch, but.
Yeah, I think you could definitely do that. This would be, you know, a good solution for beginners, I think. But yeah, 3 back stitches in general. I, you know, work with a lot of historic stuff, and they tend to be halfway in between invisible and durable. So.
Are you going to show us the invisible stitch or
this? The herringbone stitch should not be visible on the front. If you're taking small stitches, a herringbone stitch should be pretty invisible on the front. But
the needle does go through the.
It does go through. So if you don't have a good match, if you don't have, you know, if you've got white pants and only black thread, it might not be the best solution. But I think, again, like if it's a balance between durable and, you know, doable.
Okay, so the herringbone shows that. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, a little bit.
Are we going to talk about what to do with a pants that has a crease in it? Are we going to talk about what to do with a crease if a pant has an ironed in crease?
Yeah, I would definitely say that would be something where in the beginning when you're ironing, when you're getting that leg stretched out, I would try to relax the crease at the bottom. And then when I was done, I would really try to set that crease in place. I hadn't planned on talking about that, but we totally could.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I have a question. Are you going through the part that's folded over and then the regular pants to make, so that the stitches that are going to show, will not show, but are invisible on the outside will be further spaced along?
I'm doing mine about 1/2 inch, but you could do them closer together if you wanted, or further apart, essentially. I think in general, though, about 1/2 inch is, as far apart as I would do. If I did more, I think they would be more visible on the outside. And if I did less, I think they wouldn't be that durable.
But so only every other stitch isn't going to the outside of the pant, right? Every other stitch,
Yes.
right?
I'm doing a stitch into the leg,
Yep.
and then a stitch into the cuff.
Right. So the cuff one would never show.
Nope, the cuff one should never show.
Should those be a 1/2 inch apart too?
Yeah, I make all of them the same sort of spacing.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Of course, there are definitely some ways of doing this where you do, this is a pretty balanced herringbone stitch. There
Yeah.
are some ways where you might do, a really big stitch into the cuff, and then a really tiny stitch into the pant leg, and then a bigger stitch into the cuff. If you were worried about like maybe accidentally catching and pulling your hem, that would be one way of making it stronger, is by taking larger stitches into the cuff.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So Mina, I think I am pretty good with the recording, but if anyone has any other questions about this while we are recording.
Okay. Were you going to show a second stitch or?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we can talk about the catch stitch. For some people, for beginners, I know the herringbone stitch isn't always the easiest. A catch stitch I like a little bit less, but I put it in the document anyway. It's a cousin of the herringbone stitch, and instead of making back stitches, you are making forward stitches. So for that, you would take a small running stitch into the cuff and a small running stitch into the pant leg. I don't think this is as flexible. I don't think this is as good for stretchy materials. But if you are, teaching kids, if they get turned around while doing a herringbone stitch, then I don't think it's, the end of the world if you wind up doing a catch stitch instead. It's going to look pretty similar, but it uses up a little bit less thread. It's just, I don't know, it's a little bit bulkier on the outside too. I think a herringbone stitch lays sort of more flat because of the, excess thread and the flexibility, whereas a catch stitch really kind of draws the two front and back together. And then sometimes you wind up seeing a bulky hem at the bottom, particularly if you're hemming like a wool skirt or something where you just want it to have a nice sort of clean edge. I would go with the herringbone stitch instead of the catch stitch. But that is also in the document. Yeah.
Thank you. So I am going to shut off the recording. I want to say thank you for showing us how to do this, and we'll continue.